Okay, so hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Vit Koval. This is where we connect with global first entrepreneurs, remote work experts, talent acquisition leaders from all around the world to share their experiences. Our guest today is William Uranga, Director of Talent Acquisition at Spokeo. William, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Vit. I'm excited to be able to share and engage with your audience.
Sure. Welcome to the Vit Koval podcast. Before maybe we get into talent acquisition and like a remote hiring, could you maybe tell our listeners a little about your background?
Sure. Let's see. Spent most of my life growing up in the San Francisco Bay Area, Silicon Valley, as it's sometimes referenced. Went to school there, San Jose State, and have spent most of my working life, I guess, working in some aspect of technology, high technology. Specifically, some of it was hardware. Most of it's been web-based since then. Had a chance to do that individually as an individual contributor, and then got to lead teams and functions along the way. Right now, I've moved. I'm actually over here in the Phoenix area of Arizona, still working in tech, but just doing it in a different location.
Awesome. And with your like a broad experience in talent acquisition and different tech firms, including like Groupon, GoDaddy, and now Spokeo, I know you've talked about the importance of creating excellent teams that extend maybe beyond the talent department even. So could you maybe explain more about this comprehensive like a view and its effect on forming an ideal team dynamic in the tech companies?
Yeah, building a good team actually takes a lot of thought and intention. It doesn't. It isn't out there that you're just trying to solve a problem and hire a body to throw at it and fix it from that standpoint. And particularly when you start with an idea of what you want to be able to do and realize that it's bigger than you can individually do, that obviously starts to involve other people. And to be intentional about how you build your team, both what hard skills, knowing how to code in JavaScript, for example, would be a hard skill, versus some of the other business-related skills, communication. Sometimes people look for like skill sets to what they have because it's familiar, it's comfortable. It takes a good leader, a mature person, to realize what they don't have and what a person brings to that. Often that's easier done in the hard skill set, say coding JavaScript, if I don't know that. But sometimes people overlook the business side of what's needed as well. And particularly if you're starting with a small team, to be able to think further down the road of what you're going to need people to be able to take on and do they have that capacity to grow with you, is also something else to be thinking about. So when you're picking people, you're not just picking people for the now, can they do this immediately, but also can they grow with us down the road and be able to offer things that I can't do right now or help round out the team as a result of that. So it takes a lot of forward thinking. And even after you hire them, how do you intentionally develop them, grow them, give feedback and so forth are also important. So often just hiring, even getting the right people, is yet just the first step.
And was that like a really cool background working for some really awesome companies like Groupon and GoDaddy? What key moments in your career or maybe experiences that have influenced your vision, what you've just described, your approach to finding and maybe nurturing those talent? Can you talk more about this?
Right. That's a great question. So for me, my experiences were shaped by starting off in the retained search field. So I was working on the, if you will, the agency side of finding great talent for companies. And in a retained search environment, you very much care about the dynamics and culture, and often it's a very high value person you're placing. And so how you find those people, how you engage those people, how you tell a story around what is behind this role and the parts of the role becomes really important. And that's something that I certainly carried over when I went to the corporate side. Being able to tell stories, having that business mindset to bring into recruiting wasn't just, I don't know, I think sometimes there's a mindset of it's just a short order cook. You roll up to your favorite fast food joint, you order a burger and fries, don't think much of it. It's not just placing an order and getting the exact product you think of. It's much more complicated than that. So thinking about that was one thing. And then, oddly enough, all of these, most of the businesses you named, all had consumer-facing products or services. And that kind of ingrained in me how important the customer was. And in recruiting, our customer is the hiring executive or hiring manager, and then to another extent, the candidate as well. And so how we treat them and communicate with them and set expectations and even train them, if it's hiring manager or interviewer, becomes also super important. And then I'll maybe throw a little bit of a curveball. I'll say that one of the other things, maybe a third thing here, was actually experiencing some of the downturns that I know some of my colleagues, perhaps you've even experienced, of having layoffs, being ghosted, not getting a call back from an interview. Were nothing that I would wish on anybody. Nobody enjoys experiencing. But that particularly in the last, I would say 10 years, became a real focus with me and my team saying, hey, if we didn't enjoy doing that, how dare we visit that upon anybody else, particularly these candidates outside that are applying to our organization. So we came up with communication standards and when and how and where we were going to respond and follow up with people, including perhaps most recently, when somebody actually goes through the final round with us, we actually make a direct live call back to that person, even if they don't get the position. And that is just, communicating respect, appreciation of people's time, and giving, at least at a high level, some feedback, because most professionals want that. So that shaped how we were treated and how we wanted, therefore, to extend that sort of courtesy and respect back out to candidates as well. I think that was something that was important too. So that wasn't necessarily a direct company experience, but something along the journey, along the way that you asked, that's kind of shaped, some of our thinking here in talent acquisition.
Mm-hmm. And speaking about values, right? I know that transparency is a fundamental value at Spokeo, right? Mm-hmm. So, and how does this focus on openness shape your strategy for finding talent, especially when it involves like a remote talent or maybe global teams? I mean, those who are like working remotely.
So how do we work transparency in our communication?
Yeah.
Do I hear that correctly? Yeah. Good. Yeah. So I think it starts with being clear about who we are and what we're offering as far as opportunities. Who we are as a company means what's our history, why do we exist, understanding the business model, how we generate revenue, how we our efforts to keep customers and gain customers and so forth. We're learning right now, by the way, it's one thing to do that with the consumer, and now we're offering some enterprise or commercial products. Those are a different type of customer and have different expectations. So understanding that and communicating effectively with it, that's one thing, because you're telling people who you are and what you stand for by how you do it. The second thing is really setting expectations about what are people going to get, not just obviously on the product side of the company, but when somebody applies, what do they expect to get from you, or the communication? What do they expect to learn from you? Because everybody's got questions and concerns. And so when those will be addressed and handled, we try to look at the candidate experience kind of like a map. If you and I were going to New York on a road trip, we may plan to see certain things, stop by, see friends along the way, but we'd intentionally map that out on a schedule and a geographic map. And it's a similar way that we do it here with the candidate's journey with us, in the sense of, if they get to the first stage of selection, what does that mean? What does that look like? What do we communicate with them so that they know what to do? On to the second, and then we have a third stage in this case, and what do they expect to experience by then? We look for improved understanding, improved engagement, and hopefully a reduction in questions along the way that we seek to answer that. And it's not just us in talent acquisition. It's us pulling the hiring manager in, pulling the interviewer in, so that they're making sure that they have time for people in their sessions to answer questions relative to their part of the company that they do and how they do it as well. So there's that. And of course, the other important thing around transparency is not just saying who you are and saying what you're going to do, but reminding them this is what we did do, so that they understand there's a reinforcement that you followed up and followed through on your commitment as a result. That may seem a little redundant sometimes, but people are interviewing sometimes in multiple places, or they have other concerns in life and so forth. So just to remind people, hey, I said I was going to do this. This is what we just did. And here's what we're going to do next. And kind of leading them along the way, even with professional people that I'm sure take good notes. It's taking the time to be clear that's helpful. It doesn't always mean they get the right answer or outcome. We can't promise that. But we do let them know when those decision junctures come along, and we do commit to communicating whatever the news is at those points.
And I've been working with different companies for many years, and it's obvious that some companies they hire different people on different stages of their growth, right? Mm-hmm. So, and with Spokeo's growth from a social network aggregator to a people search engine that really solves some really important problems, how has this a transition influenced the types of maybe skills and maybe profiles you look for in your team? Maybe from the cultural perspective, there are some changes, maybe from skills perspective.
Well, I think it affects it in at least two ways. I'm sure there's probably even more that folks in your audience may have. I'll suggest two. One is perhaps the obvious functional or skill set that somebody brings, particularly if it's something new. For example, many companies, including ours, has a customer analytics team. Everybody wants to understand their customers, what they want, what they think they want, what they actually do, and so forth, and how we can deliver the service or product better. We have that for sure. But we also have, because data is actually in the product that we offer, we have a separate product team that deals with a different sort of data that goes into our product. And getting people that understood that was a huge hurdle to overcome. For example, we're right now in the process of hiring a product manager. Product managers always deal with customer-related data, but they don't always have dealt with products that have data inside them, and the value of the product because of that data is can vary in what you put out there. And so communicating that clearly becomes a burden on us to make sure that people understand that, as well as how we interview them to make sure we are able to distinguish, well, what data set were you working with and why and what we're doing. So that's one thing. That's just on product management, for example. The fact that I mentioned earlier that we're moving to add commercial products, not just the consumer-facing search engine that we have offered based on a subscription, but license-based, we now have to hire salespeople. Here at the company, we've never hired salespeople, so that was a brand new endeavor. It wasn't digital marketing; it was salespeople. So finding salespeople that understood, and then not just finding salespeople. There's one thing to find a salesperson that can sell you a car, plane tickets or software. That would seem pretty straightforward. But we were also looking for people that had sold data that was regulated by the government. There's certain rules around data that we sell and how it's handled and so forth. And if your salesperson doesn't have a knowledge about that, you could get in a lot of trouble for exposing the data set to the wrong person. And we would be liable for that. So hiring people that understand that becomes a different thing that we had to work not only in the job description, but qualifying people and so forth. So having that clarity as a team is super important up front, which is why we take the time to sit down with the hiring manager and the executives to have that clarity about where we're going, not just from a macro business standpoint, but also down to the specific job, and then how we communicate that to candidates as well, both in written and in verbal engagement.
And speaking about micro level, right, of your strategy, maybe more on tactical level, maybe, yeah. So I'm curious about the details of your, hiring strategy. Spokeo is a remote first company, right? So you hire guys all over the US, right? Do you hire talent outside of the US?
We have, and that's real. It's a real interesting thing because I know there's people, and certainly your audiences have people all over the spectrum of they have to be in the office 5+ days a week to never. We have gone to remote first by and large here at Spokeo since the COVID days. And we are set up to hire people in about 17 states. There were some time in which we were not able to find enough talent stateside, and so we did hire some people in Asia Pacific and also in Europe. And we still have a couple of those in Europe working with us. We work with an employer of record since we're not, as a company, established there. Most of it we have found sometimes a bit of a challenge working the different time zone difference. Sometimes it's a little much, the 8-hour shift. So what we're doing now more than ever is looking at people both in North America, so Canada, as well as in Latin America. And we're working with employers of record there to find talent that we need as well. So yes, I think when we went to Asia Pacific and Europe, we met with some success, but we found not everybody was willing to shift as much their work schedule to fit the U.S., which is mostly where our customers are based in the U.S. So that was something that we had to navigate a little bit. But working with people internationally has been great. We have once a year team week in which we bring everybody together to build rapport in person and do business planning and things like that. And we included our international contractors as well. And that was something that was fun for them. And it was great to meet everybody as well. It kind of brought the whole team together, about 200 of us to do that. And that's something that really goes a long way from an investment standpoint, time and energy, to have that. It makes your colleague more human than just somebody that shows up on the Zoom for a stand-up meeting or something like that. So I appreciate that sort of commitment, that sort of investment by the leadership to the rest of their staff members.
And what was the initial motivation for you to go global? Was it like a lack of talent, like you couldn't find talent locally, and that was the main
that was the main push. We weren't finding sufficient talent for, particularly along the data. We could, two things. One, we couldn't find the right level that we wanted, the caliber of a person, and then I must say the skill set, getting people in the data area, particularly data engineering, is quite a struggle for some to get enough. And see, that's the challenge with companies. You either partner with somebody and they have their own resources and you work through them. That was an option for us because that was 1 degree too removed. Or you hire them, contract and work with them directly, or you try to develop it yourself internally, which is much more of a long-term view. It doesn't take care of things that you need to get done right now. So it was those sort of things that we kind of walked our way through and realized, we knew some people that had access to some talent. We thought, let's go ahead and try that. And we treat everything really as an experiment, because if you learn something from it, then it's good. Right. And it works even better. But even if it doesn't work, you still learn something as a result. And that's kind of our approach to take these little steps and try things out. And that was certainly an area that we did that.
So just to clarify, in terms of this global hiring, did you start with this initiative with some partner, like some recruitment company that helped you to find some local talent in specific location?
Yes, we did. We've had actually a couple of employers of record. So in other words, they're set up in either a particular country or a particular region, and they're set up to work with those countries. They had a bench of talent or had a bead on the local talent market there, and were able to suggest and find people. I will say that we have found people sometimes on our own, and it's been nice to turn around and employ them through, for a little bit lower cost, of course, through that employer of record, since we're still not in that country to be able to hire them directly. The employer of record organization still benefits from us finding, because we payroll them through them.
And you mentioned that you're still hiring like in countries outside of the US. So how do you choose which countries to focus on for different roles? Are there specific markets you target for certain skills or positions? What drives this choice?
We've not been specific on countries. I think we're aware of certain roles, and therefore skill sets being present, maybe more in areas than others. But I would say generally, for example, in South America, we've found a great bevy of software developers up and down the stack, and not as many on the data side thus far, but they do exist. So if we have additional expansion, we'll continue to keep that open right now. Right now, we've kind of slowed down with the number of software hiring we've done, and it's been more along the sales and data science side that picks up. So it just depends on what the business is working on and what areas they're needing to further beef up or level up in.
Got it. And speaking about the sales guys, I guess you are more focused on the U.S. market, talent market, when we're talking about sales roles, right? You are not looking for those guys outside the U.S.
Correct. A, because the people that we're selling to are here in the U.S., and B, from a competitive standpoint, particularly on the domain knowledge, we're super clear on those companies that have those sort of people here. It's a real small, knowable, you can count them on probably both hands, the number of companies that way, which makes sourcing super fun. If you know where to go and contact, is just the issue of getting the right level or title, and whether or not they're curious and interested in the conversations kind of take off from there.
Got it. And I guess a bit like a sort of sensitive question in terms of compensation policies that you have in your company, because you work with you mentioned 17 states in the US. Also you work with different countries, and of course a compensation policy can be different in different locations and countries. So can you share how Spokeo handles a pay in different states? Do you follow a sort of universal policy, or do you adjust to local standards and living costs?
Yes and no. Let me explain that a little bit instead of trying to sound like I have it both ways, I suppose. So here in the States, we keep it uniform. The role is the role. We do pick a location in the sense of the cost of labor, and standardize kind of off of that for it. We have ranges like everybody else, and yes, there's certainly a lot of. I think we've made a practice, regardless of whatever state we're hiring in, we publish what that range is, from a base salary standpoint. So you'll see that. Internationally, that means that can be discovered, of course, if people look. But we usually work with the employer of record as to what is the candidate's expectations, and then a little bit about what the local market is, and try to be fair within that. Look, if you go too high, then you upset perhaps you have a chance of upsetting people that are already there doing great work and say, how come I'm not making as much as this person? If you go too low and you're hiring a good person, they will quickly realize their value and go, how come I'm only being paid this and not fair? I will say there's some things internationally per region as far as having observing holidays. So we look to kind of be fair with the number of holidays there. There's some companies that do a 13th month as a bonus as opposed to it simply being percentage. We try to keep in line with that. So I think we try to balance those sort of things out as much as possible to indicate that we appreciate the value that they're doing. So we look at this as kind of even as technically as a contractor, we try to be as fair as we would with somebody hiring full time. And I think that's part of what shows up, particularly in our tenure. Our average tenure of an employee, both non-engineering and engineering, is about 4.5 years. And being from the Bay Area that I mentioned earlier that I'm from, I mean, man, if you can hold on to an engineer for 2 years, you're considered lucky. You're doing something right. And so I think people stay with Spokeo for a couple of reasons, not just because of compensation and how they're treated there, but there's interesting work. They understand we have a high bar for hiring people, so they're not going to have to carry the person's mistakes or errors or mess that they make with themselves. And they enjoy learning from each other. And I think that goes a long way. So to more fully answer your question.
And understanding like regional differences is key for global company, right? So, how do you deal with cultural, like maybe complexities of hiring in different countries? Have any regions been like a particularly challenging or rewarding? I understood that you like delegated all like legal and payroll aspects to your partner, right? So in this employer of record,
and that
company,
helps a lot. I mean, I've done this in other companies before. So educating my team members here, saying, hey. If somebody says they need to have their lawyer look at the employment contract, that's not unusual. Don't take offense with that. It's not a short little 1 or 2 page offer letter we have here in the States. And so some people didn't realize that. So, so trying to help bridge that understanding is certainly, what we try to do in talent acquisition when it comes to doing it. Then there's also, troubleshooting. This probably just goes to good old human resource and psychology. And, if there's a problem, is it that somebody disagrees with how to do something, or is it they don't understand the importance of doing it a certain way or getting a certain result? And I think that seeking to understand before I'm understood is a good way. And we always look to clarify things with data. Another value that we have that we seek to live out. I think that helps a lot in clarifying areas of disagreement or conflict or prioritization or picking a resolution going forward. That helps a lot. Not to say we're perfect. We put our pants on the same way as everybody else does, but it goes a long way with doing it. And I think also, for example, on the engineering side, the fact that we do daily stand-ups is that communication pattern of often, but not always having meetings helps our engineers stay in touch. We use other tools like Slack. So, from an instant messaging standpoint, you can have that as right away versus an email and so forth. And the fact that we have company meetings once a month that we go over everything from product development to financials, and people can listen in and participate, makes them feel not just that they're present, but that they're included. And they can be in the know as much as anybody else. So it helps a lot, but that goes much farther than just hiring and how we do it. And I also say another thing, having the original product that Spokeo has, which is the search engine. A search engine requires everybody pulling together. So we have like 10 or so product teams. It takes every one of those to pull off a great search engine, because the moment the data isn't good or is not accurate, your customers are walking, particularly in a subscription-based model. And so we know we have, there's not much room for error, and everybody has to, contribute in that sense. And I think that sort of level of joint ownership also helps from a cultural standpoint of everybody leaning in.
Yeah, totally makes sense. And given your experience and maybe the evolving nature of remote and now global work, what do you think are the most maybe exciting or what maybe challenging trends in finding talent for the next maybe few years? How should leaders in the tech field prepare for that?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think I'm sure there's lots of areas. I think two that are interesting is the shift, I'll say at least here in the States, of talking more and more around skills versus competencies or roles. And that is partly driven by we really need the skill set as opposed to focusing obsessively about somebody having everything else. So, for example, is it really that I need somebody that has a title of data scientist, or do I just need somebody that knows SQL really well, which is a skill? And that's going to require a big mind shift on employers to get there. I think it will help people in the marketplace. They're looking to be hired, particularly people coming out of, say, a trade school or university, or the military service, because that's really sometimes hard to translate from, well, I was an E6 and I don't know what I am over here in civilian world. But if you focus on the skill sets, there's a lot more possibilities that open up of what you could do and offer from a value standpoint. And I think employers are having to get there, just as Google realized, hey, having the 4-year degree is nice, but it isn't everything. They realize that. And I think everybody goes, well, if Google says that, then we need to rethink our our thinking. And I think it's going to be the same way with the skill set. The other one is AI. And I know that's a big buzzword. Everybody likes it. But I think for those in talent acquisition, developing, automating, and getting clear about the people that you do need to talk to will become important. And I think people that are also looking for work, or the next time they are, this tool can really help you do your research, format or suggest content for your resume or communication, prepare you for interviews. I'm not saying cheat. That's not what I'm advocating at all, but prepare for questions. And so it is amazing what it can do. And if you know how to, and I think knowing how to leverage AI will become a skill itself for people, both in the workplace and outside. The ability to be able to write a script, if you will, that explains who you are, the context, the environment you need something to be done in, or your audience, and then structuring some sort of product or content that will meet and reflect you, and also what your audience is going to need to hear or understand or be persuaded of, is going to be so much more faster to generate, and will actually force us to think of more creative and higher level problems to be working on. Yes, there'll be some disruption, I'm sure, but I believe that will get us focusing on more valuable things than just, hey, Vit, please write me a paragraph on the War of 1812 or something like that. So that's I see that coming up, and it's exciting.
Yeah, and so having you here has been fantastic, William. And before we finish, for those tech talent, for those who are in the tech field and who may be wanting to join a company like Spokeo that prioritizes like a remote work, right? What advice would you have for them? How can they stand out during the hiring process, maybe?
Well, certainly if Spokeo is of at least a company that they're interested in, certainly following us with regards to key areas like LinkedIn. We have a company profile and stuff like that. It's helpful because you get news and other information, and our jobs are often picked up and posted there. But specifically to a role, I would certainly say if a role fits what you're interested in and the fact that you have those skill sets to line up, I'd welcome you to certainly, or encourage people to certainly apply. We're very clear about what we need in the now or for a particular role, but it's never to say we don't come back and talk with people a year or two later because we have a better position or more suitable position comes up. So I would always encourage people to also go to spokeo.com and look at our career page as well, and then get to know people. If people would like to contact me and ask questions, LinkedIn is probably a great way of doing that, or anybody else that's doing their sort of interesting work at Spokeo as well that are on LinkedIn as well. They're pretty easy to find as well.
Awesome. Thank you very much for your time. Yeah, thank you very much.
Great. Well, thank you for having me.